I didn't even ask what happened. That's the part Nia Bennett Castillo could never explain to anyone. Not her mother, not her attorney, not even to herself in the quiet hours after midnight when she replayed it frame by frame in her mind. The slap itself lasted less than a second, but Lorenzo's silence lasted forever. One moment she was standing in the most beautiful room she'd ever been in, wearing a dress she'd designed herself, trying to pull her wrist free from a woman who smelled like Lorenzo's cologne. The next moment, the chandeliers blurred, her ear rang, and the taste of copper flooded her mouth. And her husband, the man she had given everything to, stood there with his arms still raised, protecting the woman who had just framed her. In front of 100 people, on their wedding anniversary. If that were you, if the person who was supposed to love you most in this world struck you without asking a single question, what would you do? Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, welcome. Stories like this one are why this channel exists. Real choices, real consequences, real women who hit rock bottom and somehow found solid ground beneath it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Tap that bell so you don't miss a single chapter of what's coming, because I promise you, it gets more complicated before it gets better. And when you're done watching, leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the end. The invitation said, "An evening of elegance, the Castillo Bridal Collection." What it did not say was that the evening would end with Nia Bennett Castillo standing in a ballroom full of strangers, blood filling the space between her teeth, holding herself so still that she looked like one of the mannequins near the entrance. She had not wanted to come. That was the first thing she thought about afterward. She almost didn't go. 3 hours before the event, she'd been sitting at the kitchen island in their Manhattan penthouse with a glass of sparkling water she wasn't drinking, staring at her reflection in the darkened window of the oven. Eli was asleep down the hall. Their housekeeper, Donatella, had already laid out the gown Lorenzo chose for her. Midnight blue, modest neckline. The kind of elegant that communicates I belong here, but I'm not trying to outshine anyone. Nia had worn versions of that dress for 5 years. She picked up her phone and called Lorenzo. It went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She texted, "Are we still going together, or should I meet you there?" He didn't respond for 40 minutes, and when he finally did, it was a single word, "There." Not "I'll see you there." Not "I'm sorry, I got caught up." Just there, like a coordinate on a map rather than a message to his wife. Nia sat with that text for a long time. Then she put on the midnight blue dress, kissed Eli on the forehead without waking him, told Donatella not to wait up, and took the car service alone to the Halcyon Crown Hotel. She told herself it was fine. She had been telling herself that for years. The Halcyon Crown was the kind of place that made you feel underdressed just walking through the lobby, even when you were wearing $4,000 worth of fabric. Crystal everywhere. Staff who moved like they'd rehearsed in their sleep. The kind of soft orchestral music that wasn't quite a song, just an atmosphere. Nia spotted Lorenzo immediately. He was near the far end of the room beside a cluster of investors, laughing at something she couldn't hear. He looked the way he always looked in these rooms. Absolutely at home, completely in charge, radiating the particular confidence of a man who had never once questioned whether he deserved to be somewhere. She started walking toward him. That's when she saw Bianca Moretti. Nia had seen photographs. Lorenzo had never hidden that Bianca existed. He'd mentioned her exactly twice, both times as a former business contact, which was the kind of technically accurate statement designed to make a wife feel paranoid for pressing further. In photographs, Bianca was glamorous in the way that fashion magazines made look effortless, all cheekbones and tailored white. In person, she was something else. She was the kind of woman who fills a room not by being loud, but by making everyone else feel they should be quieter. Bianca was standing directly at Lorenzo's elbow, not beside him, the way a colleague stands, at his elbow. The 2 inches of space between their arms that said something without saying it. Nia stopped walking. She was good at reading rooms. 5 years of attending events like this one, events where everything underneath the surface was something other than what was presented, had made her fluent in subtext. She read the angle of Bianca's body toward Lorenzo. She read the way Lorenzo laughed just a fraction of a second after Bianca said something. She read the 3 inches of wine in Bianca's glass that hadn't been touched. She stood there long enough for a passing server to offer her a drink. She took it. She drank half of it before she moved again. The confrontation didn't happen at the bar or in some private corridor. It happened in the most visible part of the room, in front of the photo installation displaying silk-mounted images of the bridal collection. Nia had drifted there almost unconsciously, the way you drift towards something familiar when everything else feels wrong. She had designed one of those gowns 4 years ago, before she stopped designing, before she became primarily Lorenzo Castillo's wife. Nobody in this room knew that. She had never told Lorenzo she recognized the silhouette, never mentioned it, because some griefs are too specific to explain. She was standing there looking at her own work without being able to claim it when Bianca appeared at her side. "You must be Nia," Bianca said. Her voice was warm. That was the part that caught Nia off guard. She had expected cold, had steeled herself for cold, and warmth is harder to hold your ground against. "I am," Nia said. "I'm Bianca. I work with Lorenzo on several of his fashion investments." She extended her hand and Nia shook it, because what else do you do? "I know who you are," Nia said. Something flickered in Bianca's eyes, just briefly. "Of course you do. Lorenzo speaks very highly of you." That sentence had the precise shape of something meant to land wrong. Lorenzo speaks of you. Not Lorenzo loves you. Not Lorenzo can't stop talking about you. Just speaks, the same way you speak of a good restaurant or a reliable car. Nia said nothing. Bianca leaned slightly closer. "You look tired," she said, in a voice pitched low enough that only Nia could hear it. "Marriage is hard work, isn't it? Especially when only one person is working at it." Nia turned to look at her directly. "Is there something you want?" Bianca smiled. "Just to introduce myself." She reached out and touched Nia's arm. Nia's instinct was to step back, and she did. But Bianca's hand closed around her wrist, grip tightening in a way that looked, from across the room, nothing like what it felt like up close. Nia pulled. Bianca held on for 3 seconds longer than necessary. Then she released, stumbled backward in her white gown with her wineglass tilting in a practiced arc, and the red spread across the silk like something deliberate dressed as accident. The sound Bianca made was quiet enough to be credible and loud enough to carry. Every head in a 10-foot radius turned. Nia stood there with her empty hand still raised from pulling free, and she understood, with a clarity that arrived too late to be useful, that she was looking at a woman who had planned exactly this: the white dress, the red wine, the position, the moment, all of it. She opened her mouth to say something. She didn't know what. An explanation, maybe, or just her name. She never got the chance. Lorenzo moved through the crowd the way he always moved, fast, decisive, certain. He crossed the distance between them in under 15 seconds, and it would have been impressive if the certainty hadn't been pointed in entirely the wrong direction. He stepped in front of Bianca. He looked at Nia. There was no question in his face. That was what she would remember later. There was no question, no wait. What happened? Let me understand this. There was only a verdict, rendered in the 3 seconds it took him to assess the scene he'd walked into. Bianca in a ruined white gown. Nia with her hand in the air. The wine. He said her name, just once. Then his hand moved. The slap was open-palmed. Her head turned with it. She felt her earring pull, didn't hear the sound so much as feel it vibrate through her jaw, tasted copper immediately. Around her, the music didn't stop. The orchestra kept playing something soft and European, but the conversation did, and the sound of that silence was louder than anything else in the room. She didn't fall. She had enough years of holding herself together in impossible rooms that her body refused to buckle even when her mind went briefly white. She stood very still. She waited for the room to stop ringing. Then she turned to face her husband. Lorenzo was already positioned between her and Bianca, his back to Nia, one hand on Bianca's arm. Protective. That was the word. I was being protective of the woman who had just grabbed Nia's wrist and spilled wine on herself. Nia looked at the back of Lorenzo's head, at the line of his shoulders inside that expensive jacket, at the way he was bent slightly toward Bianca, already managing damage that wasn't his to manage, already certain he knew what had happened. She said, "Do you remember what day it is?" He didn't answer. She waited. He still didn't answer. And in that silence, not the silence of a man who didn't know the answer, but the silence of a man who knew and couldn't quite justify ignoring it, something in Nia finished. She couldn't have explained it to anyone. It wasn't rage exactly, though there was rage somewhere underneath it. It wasn't grief, though that was there too. It was more like the sound a door makes when it closes all the way for the first time and you realize the latch has finally caught. She picked up a fresh glass of water from a passing tray, drank it slowly, set it back down, and walked toward the exit with her back straight and her chin level. She did not run. She did not cry. Not because she wasn't capable of either, but because she had spent 5 years performing composure in rooms like this one, and she understood, on some cellular level, that how she left this room would matter more than anything else she did tonight. She walked out. The car service driver said nothing during the ride home, which she was grateful for. She sat behind him with her hands folded in her lap and watched the city scroll past the windows, Midtown giving way to the Upper West Side, the lights thinning slightly, people smaller at this hour. Her face had stopped hurting and started aching. That was how she knew the shock was wearing off. She was thinking about a conversation she'd had with Lorenzo's mother, Teresa, about 8 months into their marriage. They'd been in the Castillo family kitchen in New Jersey, Teresa's kitchen, where the tile was from 1987 and nobody had ever changed it because Teresa liked it that way. And Teresa had been rolling dough for something Nia couldn't remember now, and she'd said without looking up, "Lorenzo loves the way fire loves wood, completely, entirely, until there's nothing left of you." Nia had laughed. She'd thought it was a compliment. She understood now it was a warning. Back in the penthouse, she walked down the hall to Eli's room. He was face down the way he always slept, one arm off the side of the mattress, the nightlight casting a warm orange circle on the ceiling above his head. 4 years old. He had Lorenzo's jaw and her eyes, and the particular way of tilting his head when he was confused that belonged entirely to himself. She sat on the floor beside his bed. She stayed there for a long time. When she got up, she didn't go to her own room. She went to the study, sat behind the desk where she used to sketch before sketching, stopped feeling like hers, opened her laptop, and sent one email. To her attorney. The email had 3 words: send the papers. She didn't sleep. By 2 in the morning, she had emptied her old design portfolio, the actual physical one, the navy binder with the broken spine that predated Lorenzo by 6 years, out of the locked drawer where she'd been keeping it like something in storage. She spread the sketches on the kitchen floor and sat cross-legged looking at them. They were good. She'd forgotten they were this good. The proportions were clean, the ideas specific, the voice on the page unmistakably hers. She'd stopped designing because Lorenzo had said once, not even unkindly, that it was difficult to build a family when both partners had demanding careers. And could she consider a slower pace until Eli was older? And she had said yes. She'd said yes because she loved him. She'd said yes because she believed that sacrifice made by one person in a marriage was shared between both. She understood now that Lorenzo had never felt the weight of what she put down. You can only feel the weight of a sacrifice if you understand what was given up. He had never asked about her work. Not once in 5 years had he said, "I miss your designing," or "show me what you were working on." She had handed him something essential, and he had simply accepted it without looking at it. She put the sketches back in the portfolio, carefully, each one in order. Then she opened Eli's room and started packing. The papers arrived by secure courier at 4:17 in the morning. Her attorney had been waiting, which meant the attorney had also been waiting for this specific call, which meant Nia was not the only person who had seen this night coming for longer than she'd admitted. She signed everything. She removed her wedding ring and placed it on the kitchen island with the clarity of someone setting down something they've been carrying too long. The ring left an indentation in her swollen finger. She looked at that indentation for a moment. Then she picked up Eli's backpack and walked down the hall. She woke him gently. He made the small, confused sounds 4-year-olds make when reality interrupts a dream, and she held him against her chest and said, "We're going on an adventure, baby, a real one." He said, still mostly asleep, "Does it have croissants?" And she pressed her face against the top of his head and breathed him in and did not let herself fall apart. "Yes," she said. "Lots of croissants." She had called Teresa 20 minutes earlier. She hadn't explained much. There wasn't much to explain at 4 in the morning that Teresa didn't already understand. Teresa had said, "I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't take anything he bought you." Nia had looked around at the apartment, the furniture, the art, the custom cabinetry, the closet full of gowns chosen for her by a man who knew her dress size better than he knew her dreams. She took her old portfolio, her sewing tools, a suitcase of clothes for herself and Eli, and the emergency cash she had been quietly setting aside for 14 months. She left the ring. She left the Castillo credit card. She left 5 years of her own silence sitting in the apartment like a tenant who'd finally gotten notice to leave. When Teresa pulled up in her own car, not a Castillo car, her personal Volvo, 20 years old and smelling of lavender, Nia buckled Eli into the back seat, got in the passenger side, and stared through the windshield. "Where are we going, Grandma?" Eli asked. "The airport," Teresa said. "Where at the airport?" Teresa looked at Nia. Nia said, "Paris." Eli considered this. "Do they have croissants in Paris?" Teresa laughed, a real laugh, startled out of her, and Nia felt something loosen in her chest that had been locked for years. "They invented croissants, sweetheart," Nia said. As the city appeared and disappeared in the car windows, as the skyline shifted and the tunnels opened and Manhattan began to fall behind them, Nia held her old portfolio against her chest and did not look back. She was not sure what was in front of her. She was not sure of much. But she knew what she had left in that apartment, a version of herself that had learned to take up less and less space every year until she nearly disappeared into the marble and the silence and the midnight blue dresses that fit perfectly and meant nothing. That woman was gone. What happened next? Who Nia Bennett became without the Castillo name attached to her, like a signature on someone else's painting. She couldn't know yet. But the plane was going to Paris, and the tickets were one way. And somewhere over the Atlantic, with Eli asleep across her lap, and Teresa's hand briefly covering hers in the dark, Nia Bennett made herself one promise: quiet, private, with no witness but the altitude. She would never again stay in a room where her silence was mistaken for consent. Lorenzo Castillo did not wake up the next morning. He woke up the next afternoon. That detail mattered more than he would ever admit, even to himself. That while his wife was signing divorce papers in the blue hours before dawn, while his mother was driving a Volvo through the Lincoln Tunnel with his son asleep in the back seat, while a plane was lifting off a runway with the two people he claimed to love most, Lorenzo Castillo was unconscious in the master bedroom of a penthouse that still smelled like her perfume, sleeping off 3 glasses of Barolo and the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent an entire evening being charming. He woke at 12:47 in the afternoon. He lay still for a moment, the way he always did, assessing the quality of the light, calculating the day. Then he reached across the bed and found it empty, which was not unusual. Nia was often up before him. He'd stopped noticing that she was always up before him, the same way you stop noticing a clock on the wall until it stops working. He showered, he dressed, he came into the kitchen. The first thing he saw was the ring. It sat on the kitchen island beside the Castillo family credit card. The black one, the one with no limit, the one he'd handed her years ago with the casual confidence of a man who believed that access to money was the same thing as being known. The ring caught the light from the window. He stood there looking at it for probably 10 seconds before his brain caught up to what his eyes were telling him. He picked it up, still warm from the island's surface. That felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. "Nia." Silence. "Nia." He walked down the hall. Eli's door was open. The room was the particular kind of quiet that a room gets when the person who filled it is gone. Not just absent, but gone. The air slightly different, the small chaos of toys and books, and a 4-year-old's general disorder undisturbed because nobody had moved anything since last night. Eli's stuffed giraffe, the one he couldn't sleep without, the one that had been washed so many times it had lost most of its spots, was missing from the bed. Lorenzo stood in the doorway. He looked at the giraffe-shaped absence on the pillow for a long time. Then he called Nia's phone. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He stood in his kitchen holding a wedding ring that fit in his palm like an accusation and called his wife's phone 4 more times in 3 minutes, which was more attempts at reaching her than he had made in any single week of the past year, and he understood that about himself only vaguely, in the blurred way you understand things you don't want to look at directly. On the 7th call, someone picked up, not Nia. The voicemail again. But this time he heard her recorded voice, and the particular lightness in it, the version of her voice that existed before she became primarily Mrs. Castillo, hit him somewhere between the sternum and the throat. He hung up. He called his mother. Teresa picked up on the second ring. "Where is she?" he said. A pause. Not the pause of someone searching for information, The pause of someone who had been waiting for this specific question and had already decided exactly how much to give. "She's safe," Teresa said. "That's not what I asked." "I know what you asked." "Ma." His voice dropped. That particular register, low, controlled, the one that made men in rooms go quiet, didn't work on Teresa. It had never worked on Teresa. "Teresa, tell me where my wife is." "She's not your wife anymore, Lorenzo." The words didn't land the way a slap lands. They landed the way water lands on stone. Patient, consistent, inevitable. He actually pulled the phone away from his ear and looked at it, as if the device itself had said something impossible. "What are you talking about?" "She signed. The papers were filed this morning." He said nothing. "Lorenzo." "She's angry," he said. "She'll calm down. Whatever happened last night, I know what happened last night." "Then you know Bianca provoked her. Nia overreacted and I stepped in before it escalated and—" "Stop!" Teresa's voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 63 years choosing exactly when to spend her authority, and she was spending it now. "Stop talking and listen to me. When was the last time you asked Nia how she was?" He opened his mouth. Not how she was managing Eli's schedule. Not how the apartment was. How she was. He closed his mouth. "When was the last time you remembered her birthday without an assistant sending you a reminder?" That's not. When was the last time you sat down with her? Just her. Not a dinner party. Not an event. Not a room full of people you needed to impress. And asked what she was thinking about. The kitchen was very quiet. "I take care of her," Lorenzo said. It came out thinner than he intended. "You provided for her," Teresa said. "That's not the same thing. You've never once understood the difference, and I am your mother, so I know exactly whose fault that is, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. But right now you're going to hear me. What you did last night in that ballroom. I didn't know what happened. You didn't ask." Her voice finally cracked just slightly, like something under pressure finding the thinnest place in the wall. "Lorenzo, you did not ask. You walked into that room and you saw what you assumed and you hit your wife without asking her a single question, in front of 100 people, on your anniversary." The word anniversary sat in the air between them like something radioactive. Lorenzo set the ring down on the counter. He'd forgotten. He had genuinely, completely forgotten. "Where are they?" he said. His voice was different now. The control was still there. It was always there. It was structural. It was load-bearing. But something underneath it had shifted. "No," Teresa said. "She has my son. She has her son, who she has been raising largely alone for 4 years while you attended events and made deals and forgot anniversaries. I want to know where—" "I'm not telling you." A beat. "And before you say another word, think very carefully about who you're talking to. I changed your diapers. I also helped her pack. You don't get to be angry with me about which side I'm on, because you chose this side for me when you raised your hand to that girl." Lorenzo said nothing for a long time. He heard his mother breathing on the other end of the line. "Is Eli okay?" he finally said. Something softened, barely, in Teresa's silence. "Yes." "Is she okay?" A longer pause. "She will be." The call ended. Lorenzo stood in his kitchen with the ring on the counter and the credit card beside it and the signed divorce papers. He found them on the kitchen table 3 minutes later, neatly squared, with a post-it note from the attorney's office in the corner, and he did something he had not done in longer than he could remember accurately. He sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. Not in the movie's sense of collapsing. He just sat down, back against the cabinet, knees up, the divorce papers in his hand, because standing suddenly seemed like more effort than the moment deserved. He sat there for 17 minutes by the clock on the wall. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and called Bianca Moretti. She answered on the first ring, which told him she'd been waiting. "Lorenzo." Warm, careful. The voice of someone performing a naturalness they didn't feel. "I need to see the security footage from last night," he said. A pause. "What footage?" "The ballroom. The Halcyon Crown has cameras everywhere, Bianca. You know that because I know you've been in that hotel before, and you don't walk into rooms without knowing where the cameras are." Another pause. Longer. "You're upset," she said. "Request the footage or I'll have my lawyers do it." "Lorenzo, last night was— what happened was— request the footage." He heard her breathe. He knew that breath. He'd known her for 11 years, which was 4 years longer than he'd known Naya, and he knew the specific quality of silence that meant she was recalibrating. "Come over," she said. "We can talk. You shouldn't be alone right now." "I'm not coming over." "Lorenzo, my wife is gone. My son is gone. My mother isn't speaking to me." Each sentence came out flat and evenly spaced, like a man reading from a list he doesn't want to finish. "Request the footage, Bianca. I'll know within 2 hours whether or not you did it. And if I have to find out the hard way, everything we have built together, every investment, every contact, every business arrangement, ends by morning. All of it." The line went very quiet. "I'll send it to you," she said. "Thank you." He hung up. The footage arrived in his email 40 minutes later, attached to a message that said only, "I can explain." He watched it standing at the kitchen island with his phone in both hands, the ring still sitting 3 inches to his left where he'd put it down and hadn't moved it. He watched Nia arrive at the reception alone. He watched her drift toward the bridal installation. And something moved in his chest watching that, because he hadn't known she'd gone there, hadn't known she stood in front of those gowns, and he noticed, with the specific clarity of someone seeing clearly for possibly the first time, that she stood there the way a person stands in front of something that belongs to them. He watched Bianca approach her. He watched the conversation. No audio on this angle, but he could see the body language. Nia polite, stiffening slowly, Bianca leaning in, something passing between them that made Nia's chin rise the way it rose when she was holding herself together. He watched Bianca's hand close around Nia's wrist. He watched Nia pull back. He watched Bianca's other arm extend, controlled, deliberate. The glass tipping at an angle that was not an accident, could not have been an accident, because Bianca Moretti had the most deliberately physical awareness of any person he'd ever met, and she did not drop things. And the red spread across the white, and Bianca stumbled backward with the precision of a woman who had rehearsed this fall. He watched himself enter the frame. He watched himself cross the room. He watched himself step in front of Bianca. He watched his own arm move, and he watched his wife's head turn with it, and he watched her stay standing because she was Nia, and Nia did not fall in public. And he watched the room freeze around her. He watched her say something to him. He watched himself not answer. He watched her take a glass of water from a passing server, drink it, set it down, and walk out of the frame with her back straight and her chin level. He watched all of it twice. Then he put the phone face down on the island. He stood there for a moment with both hands flat on the marble. Then he picked up his phone again and called Bianca back. She answered immediately. He said, "You did it on purpose." Not a question. "Lorenzo, please listen to me before." "You grabbed her wrist so I would see it from across the room. You timed the wine for when I was looking. You staged the fall." His voice was still level. That was the most frightening thing about it, and some part of him knew it was frightening, and he kept it level anyway. "You manufactured an incident so that I would react before I thought, because you knew me well enough to know I would." Silence. "You wanted to see if I would choose you," he said. "That's what this was." More silence, then quietly, "You've been choosing her for 5 years. She is my wife. She has been your wife. And in 5 years, Lorenzo, how many times did you actually see her?" Her voice cracked. Real, this time, or real enough that he couldn't tell the difference, which was the problem with Bianca Moretti, had always been the problem. "How many dinners did you cancel? How many events did you bring her to and then spend the entire night talking to everyone but her? I have watched. You have a marriage that was a performance, and she has watched you have a relationship with your work and your family name and your—" "This is not about my marriage," he said. "This is about what you did to my wife. I made a mistake. You made a calculation." He took a breath. "I want you out of every investment we share. My lawyers will contact your people by end of business tomorrow. You will make no public statements about the dissolution. You will return the samples from the spring collection, and I don't want to hear from you again." The silence this time was different, hollowed out. "Lorenzo," her voice had gone small. "You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more." He hung up. He removed Bianca Moretti from his life the way you remove a splinter, precisely, completely, with the full understanding that the wound was partly your own fault for not seeing it sooner. And then he stood alone in a penthouse that suddenly felt like a building he'd been squatting in, surrounded by furniture and art and marble and custom cabinetry, and understood for the first time with real physical weight that removing Bianca changed exactly nothing about where Nia and Eli were. They were still gone. The papers were still signed. The ring was still sitting on the island like a small accusation. He picked it up again, turned it, put it in his jacket pocket. He called the private investigator he kept on retainer. They found a booking under Teresa Castillo's name, not Nia's, which told him his mother had planned this carefully enough to anticipate him looking. A one-way to Paris, Charles de Gaulle, departed 6:43 in the morning. 2 passengers. Child seat requested, one way. He sat with that for a long time. His attorney called him at 6 in the evening. They spoke for 40 minutes about custody arrangements and jurisdiction and the jurisdictional complexity of a child removed across international borders without a custody agreement in place. And by the end of the call, Lorenzo had 3 options, and none of them felt like anything except moves in a game he hadn't realized he was playing until he'd already lost the first 3 rounds. She didn't violate anything, his attorney said carefully. There was no custody order yet. She has every right to I know what she has a right to, Lorenzo said. Then you understand that any aggressive legal action at this stage will not only likely fail, it will set the tone for everything that follows. I know. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. What do I do? A pause that felt almost apologetic. You respond to the divorce petition. You engage constructively. You make it clear that you want a relationship with your son, not a legal battle. A beat. And Lorenzo, I say this as someone who has worked with your family for 11 years. You give her what she's asking for. She's asking for sole custody. She's asking for space and safety and the ability to live her life. The custody question is separate, but if you go in fighting, you will lose the thing you actually want, which is access to your son. Lorenzo hung up. He poured 2 inches of whiskey into a glass. He didn't drink it. He stood at the window of the penthouse and looked at Manhattan spread out below him. The lights coming on as evening settled, the movement of cars and people, the city conducting its absolute indifference to any one man's particular disaster. And he thought about Eli asleep in some hotel in Paris, probably having demanded croissants for dinner, probably already charmed whoever he'd met in the lobby, because Eli charmed everyone, had been charming people since he was 18 months old and discovered that smiling at strangers produced immediate and delightful results. He thought about Nia on the plane. What she'd looked like, what she'd been thinking. He thought about the footage, the way her head had turned. He set the glass down without drinking from it. He walked down the hall to Eli's room, because he did not have anywhere else to go, and the room was the only place in the apartment that felt like it contained something real. He sat on Eli's bed. He picked up one of the toys on the nightstand, a small wooden car, hand-painted, something Teresa had brought back from somewhere European years ago. He turned it over in his hands. The room smelled like his son. That particular combination of baby shampoo that they'd never switched away from, and the slight sweetness of whatever Eli had been eating before bed. It was absurdly specific. He had not known he'd memorized it until now, sitting in this room that his son was not in, with this smell that was not attached to a person anymore, just to an absence. He set the car back exactly where it had been. He reached over and straightened the pillow where the stuffed giraffe used to be. He sat in his son's room for a very long time. Then he stood up, squared his shoulders the way he always did, and walked out. He had work in the morning. He would begin whatever came next. He was Lorenzo Castillo, and he knew how to begin things. What he was only now beginning to understand, in the specific gutting way you understand things that arrive too late to be useful, was that the ability to begin things had never been his problem. It was the middle, the staying, the being present for the long, unspectacular work of loving someone when there was nothing dramatic left to do. He'd always been better at the beginning, and the beginning was over. 3 weeks later, Bianca Moretti called him from a blocked number. He let it ring. She called from a different number the next morning. He blocked it. On the 3rd day, she showed up at the lobby of the building, and his security held her at the desk while he watched from the elevator camera, and she stood there for 11 minutes before she left. And he watched all 11 minutes with his arms crossed and felt almost nothing except a tired recognition that this too was something he should have seen coming years before it arrived. He sent the footage of the ballroom confrontation to his attorney that afternoon, and requested that it be formally included in the divorce documentation on the grounds of Bianca's deliberate provocation and his own. And he used the word himself, in his own email, in his own handwriting on the attached note. His own catastrophic failure of judgment. His attorney read it and called him immediately. "This will help with the custody petition," he said. "It demonstrates self-awareness. It contextualizes the incident. I'm not sending it for strategic reasons," Lorenzo said. "I'm sending it because it happened, and it needs to be part of the record. Whatever that does or doesn't do for me legally, I don't care." A long pause. "Okay," his attorney said, and then, after another beat, "For what it's worth, that's a different response than I would have expected from you 6 months ago." Lorenzo didn't say anything. He hung up and went back to work. But the work felt different now, thinner. The same calls, the same rooms, the same negotiations and deals, and the particular theater of powerful men pretending to trust each other. All of it continued exactly as before, and none of it filled whatever had opened up in the center of his day, like a room with the furniture removed. He kept finding himself doing the calculation. What time is it in Paris? He kept not calling. He kept doing the calculation. He booked a flight to Paris 3 separate times in the month following Nia's departure. He canceled all 3 before boarding. He told himself he was giving her space. He told himself it was strategic, that arriving too soon would harden her, that he needed to wait for the right moment. What he didn't tell himself, because some truths are too uncomfortable to carry in the daylight, was that he was afraid. Not of Nia's anger. He could manage anger. Anger was legible. Anger had shape. Anger was something you could respond to. He was afraid of her calm. He had seen it in the ballroom, the way she walked out, the way she collected herself and left without looking back. That was not the exit of a woman who was waiting to be followed. That was the exit of a woman who had already arrived at a decision and was simply putting her body in the right place to match it. That calm was the most frightening thing he had ever witnessed. And he had, in his life, witnessed genuinely frightening things. A month became 6 weeks. 6 weeks became 2 months. The bakeries opened at 6 in the morning, whether she slept or not. The metro ran on its own schedule. The rain came when it wanted. The language moved around her like water around a stone, and she was the stone, fixed and slightly bewildered, nodding at things she only half understood while Eli absorbed French the way children absorb everything, effortlessly, almost insultingly fast, as if the language had been waiting inside him and Paris had simply unlocked it. She had been fluent once, conversational, at least. She'd studied for 2 years in college, had spent a summer in Lyon before everything became about building a career and then about building a marriage, and then about maintaining both while one of them quietly collapsed. The French she had now was museum French, tourist French, the French of someone who could read a menu and ask for directions but lost the thread completely the moment a conversation moved faster than she could track. It moved faster than she could track approximately always. Julien Marchand's atelier was on a narrow street in the 11th arrondissement that smelled like bread in the morning and diesel in the afternoon. The building was old in the way that Paris buildings are old. Not crumbling, just settled, as if it had made peace with gravity centuries ago and saw no reason to revisit the agreement. The atelier occupied the 2nd floor. 3 rooms. Good natural light from the north-facing windows, bolts of fabric stacked with a system that made sense only to Julien and one assistant named Celine, who had been there for 9 years and looked at Nia with the specific evaluating expression of a woman who had seen many of Julien's projects arrive with ambition and leave with bruised egos. Julien himself was 61, compact, meticulous, with the kind of face that had been handsome in youth and was now something better. Interesting. He had been Nia's mentor at Parsons for 1 semester, 12 years ago, and had kept in sporadic contact the way good teachers sometimes do. A note when he saw her work mentioned somewhere, an email when he was in New York. When she had called him from the Paris airport, still in her coat, Eli asleep in the plastic chair beside her, he had said only, "Come to the atelier at 9 on Monday. Bring your portfolio." He had not asked what happened. She loved him for that. What he had not told her, what she discovered on her first Monday, arriving at 9 sharp, portfolio under her arm, dressed in the most professional thing she owned that wasn't associated with the Castillo event, was that there was no position waiting for her. Not exactly. Julien had a full staff. He didn't need another designer, and he was too honest to pretend otherwise. "What I have," he said, standing at the long cutting table with his reading glasses on top of his head, "is work. There's always work. Whether I pay you for it depends on how useful you are. Nia stood across the table from him. What kind of work? The kind nobody else wants to do. He gestured around the atelier without particular drama. Fabric inventory, pattern corrections, pressing, assisting Celine with client fittings when she needs an extra pair of hands. Your French needs to be functional within 60 days or you'll be more hindrance than help with clients. My French is, I heard you on the phone with the building manager yesterday. Your French is an emergency. He said it without cruelty, just precision. 60 days. And I need you here at 8, not 9. Celine opens at 8. Nia looked at him. You said 9. I said come at 9 on Monday so we could have this conversation. Now you know the conversation. 8, starting Wednesday. She wanted to say something sharp. The version of herself that had survived 5 years of Lorenzo Castillo's household. The version that had learned to manage events and vendors and a domestic infrastructure of a size that most people wouldn't recognize as labor, had a very low tolerance for being managed by someone else. She said, fine, 8. She was there at 7:45 on Wednesday and every day after that. She did not do it to impress Julian. She did it because the alternative was lying in the small apartment she'd rented in the 10th arrondissement. 2 bedrooms, 4th floor, radiator that made a sound like someone clearing their throat repeatedly, staring at the ceiling while Eli slept and the city moved outside and her mind went to places she couldn't afford to let it go. Work was structure. Structure was survival. She had learned that the hard way, and she was not going to unlearn it now. The first month was humiliating in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Not because anyone was cruel, Celine thawed faster than expected, sharing her lunch the 3rd week without being asked, which in French workplace culture apparently meant she'd been accepted. But because the gap between who Nia had been before her marriage and what she could actually execute now was wider than she'd admitted to herself on that kitchen floor in Manhattan. Her hands were slow. She'd stopped sewing consistently 3 years into the marriage. There had always been something more urgent, some household demand, some event to prepare for. And the muscle memory wasn't gone, but it was rusty, the way a language gets rusty, accurate but effortful. She made errors. She corrected them. She made them again on the next piece and corrected them again. She spent 40 minutes repressing a seam that Celine would have done in 8. Julian watched this without commenting. That was almost worse than commentary. Eli, meanwhile, was enrolled in the local École Maternelle 3 blocks from the apartment, and this was a disaster for approximately 2 weeks, and then abruptly wasn't. The turnaround happened on a Tuesday when Nia picked him up and found him in the courtyard deep in some kind of negotiation involving a red ball and 3 French children, conducting the entire exchange in what appeared to be a mixture of French, English, and invented gestures that all 4 parties found entirely satisfactory. He looked up when he saw her, broke into the grin, and said, Maman, je veux rester. His accent was better than hers. She stood at the school gate and felt something complicated happen in her chest. Pride and grief arriving at exactly the same moment, occupying the same space, refusing to separate. She said, okay, 5 more minutes. She spoke to him in English. He answered sometimes in French now. She let him. A bilingual child was not the worst thing she had accidentally produced. At night, after Eli was asleep, she sketched. This was not a decision she made. It was something that started happening the 3rd week, when she couldn't sleep and picked up a pencil to do something with her hands, and an hour passed before she noticed. The sketches were different from the ones in her portfolio. Those had been the work of a 26-year-old who knew what she wanted to say but was still learning the vocabulary. These were something else, quieter, more deliberate, built around the specific constraints of a woman who had learned the hard way that structure and freedom are not opposites, but partners. She filled a notebook in 3 weeks. She started a second one. She told no one. 6 weeks in, the first real crisis arrived, and it came not from Lorenzo or from money or from anything external. It came from Nia herself on a gray Thursday afternoon when Celine was out sick and Julian asked her to handle a fitting alone for a private client who had ordered a reworked vintage gown. The client's name was Margot. She was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of cool assessment in her eyes that French women of a certain generation seemed to cultivate as naturally as good posture. She came in at 3 o'clock, looked at Nia, and said in accented but precise English, "You are not Celine." "No," Nia said. "Celine is unwell today. I'm Nia." I'll be handling the fitting. Margot looked her over. Not unkindly, but thoroughly, the way you assess something you're not certain you trust yet. You are American. Yes. Julian's new person. Yes. He has new people sometimes. Most of them leave. She set down her bag with a decisive sound. Where do you want me? Nia took a breath. She set up the fitting area with hands that were steadier than she felt. She helped Margot into the partially altered gown, a 1970s column dress in ivory silk charmeuse that had been brought in for restructuring, and she stood back and looked at it. The previous alteration had been Celine's work, mostly correct, but missing something at the shoulder line. The pull was subtle, just enough to disrupt the drape, the kind of thing a client might not identify, but would feel. The unconscious sense that the dress wasn't quite right, that something needed adjusting without being able to say what. Nia saw it immediately. She also knew that fixing it properly would require unpicking a section of Celine's work, which was not her place, which was not what she'd been asked to do, which was technically outside the scope of what Julian had assigned her. She stood looking at the shoulder for a moment. Margot watched her in the mirror. You see something, Margot said. I see a small issue with the shoulder seam. Celine put it there. I know. Can you fix it? Nia met her eyes in the mirror. Yes. Will you? A pause. Do you want me to? Margot turned her head slightly and looked at Nia directly rather than through the mirror. I want to wear this dress to my daughter's wedding in 3 weeks, and I want to feel like myself in it. Can you make that happen? Nia picked up the seam ripper. She spent 2 hours on that fitting. She unpicked the shoulder section carefully, reworked the seam allowance by 4 millimeters, repressed the charmeuse with the correct heat for the fabric's weight. Charmeuse punished incorrect heat mercilessly. She had learned that as a student, and the knowledge had stayed, and restitched it by hand because the machine would have left an impression in the silk. When she was done, she helped Margot back into the gown, and they both stood looking at the mirror. The dress fell the way it was supposed to fall. The shoulder line was clean. The ivory charmeuse moved when Margot moved, responsive and light, no longer fighting the body inside it. Margot was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Who taught you? I taught myself mostly. I had one good teacher. You should be designing. I'm sorting fabric right now, Nia said. Margot looked at her in the mirror. That is temporary or permanent? Temporary. Nia said it before she'd decided it was true. Then she realized it was. Margot nodded once. Good. When Julian came in at closing to check the fitting notes, he found Margot's gown rehung, the alterations documented in the log in Nia's handwriting, and a note from Margot at the front. The new American fixed what needed fixing. Keep her. Julian read the note twice. He set it down on the counter. He didn't say anything to Nia about it until the following morning, when he put a coffee on the cutting table beside her and said, You unpicked Celine's shoulder work. Yes, without asking me. You weren't here. I could have been reached. Nia looked up from the pattern she was correcting. The dress needed it. The client needed it. Reaching you would have taken 20 minutes, and the client's time is worth more than my comfort level. Julian looked at her for a long moment. His expression was the one he wore when he was deciding something. She'd learned to recognize it in 6 weeks, the very slight narrowing of the eyes, the almost imperceptible pause before he responded to anything that mattered. Starting next week, he said, you'll assist on the Renard Commission. Nia put down her pencil. What's the Renard Commission? A private bridal order. Custom. The client is very specific. He picked up his coffee. And your French needs to be functional for client meetings by then, so stop being embarrassed about making mistakes and start making them faster. He walked away. Nia sat at the cutting table for a moment. Then she picked up her pencil, and under the pattern notes she was correcting, she wrote, Renard Commission, next week. Stop being embarrassed. She looked at those words, then she underlined them. The money problem arrived without announcing itself, the way money problems usually do. She had calculated carefully, or she'd believed she had. The apartment deposit, the first 3 months' rent, Eli's school materials, the setup costs of a new life in a city where nothing was cheap, and she was being paid in cash by Julian at a rate that was honest but modest, the way all honest rates felt modest when measured against the actual cost of existing. What she hadn't fully accounted for was the gap between the child support Lorenzo was legally required to provide and the child support that actually arrived in the first 2 months, which was routed through an American account and subject to international transfer delays, and 2 separate bureaucratic holds that her French bank looked at with patient bureaucratic indifference. She had enough for the 3rd month's rent. She did not have enough for the 3rd month's rent and the school fee installment due the same week. She sat at her kitchen table on a Tuesday night with a notebook and a calculator. She did it by hand because looking at numbers on a screen felt less real than looking at them in her own handwriting. And she added the columns 3 different ways, hoping to get a different answer each time. She got the same answer every time. She was 420 euros short. She closed the notebook. She sat very still. She thought about her mother, who was in Atlanta, and who she had called twice since Paris, but not told the full truth to, because her mother would worry, and worrying was her mother's primary love language, and Nia could not absorb that right now. She thought about her attorney, who could theoretically accelerate the transfer issue, but had already spent significant time on this case. She thought about Teresa, who had texted twice to ask how Eli was eating. Then she opened the notebook again. She wrote one name, Julian. She closed it again. She sat there for a long time. Asking Julian for money was not something she was willing to do. Not because of pride exactly, or not only because of pride, but because Julian had given her something more valuable than money, which was the chance to rebuild her professional identity in a context where nobody knew what she'd left behind. Walking into his office and saying, "I'm short this month," would shift the dynamic between them in a way she couldn't shift back, would make her someone who needed managing rather than someone who was rebuilding, and she was not willing to let that happen. She thought about it for 2 more days. On Thursday morning, she walked into a consignment shop 3 metro stops from the apartment and sold 4 items of clothing she'd brought from New York, 2 evening gowns and a cashmere coat and a silk blouse, all things Lorenzo had bought her, all things she'd packed because they were practical and warm, and she'd been packing at 4 in the morning without time to be selective about symbolism. She walked out with 460 euros. She paid the school fee that afternoon. She walked home with 40 euros left and bought a bag of groceries and a small bouquet of whatever flowers were cheapest at the market stall. Yellow ones. She didn't know what they were called. Eli called them sunflowers that aren't sunflowers. And she put them in the glass measuring cup on the kitchen table because she didn't own a vase. And she made pasta for dinner and watched Eli eat 2 full bowls and talk about something his classmate Theo had done that was apparently extremely funny. And she sat across from him in this small apartment with the radiator making its throat-clearing sound and the yellow flowers in the measuring cup and thought, this is enough. This specific moment is enough. She meant it. She was surprised that she meant it. The Renard Commission changed things. The client was a woman named Sophie Renard, 34, the daughter of a prominent Parisian family, who had come to Julian because she wanted a wedding gown that did not look like a wedding gown. Her words, delivered in rapid French that Nia caught about 70% of and pieced together from context. Sophie wanted something that could be worn again, something that didn't announce itself, something that held structure without performing it. It was the most interesting design problem Nia had encountered in 5 years. She stayed late 2 nights in a row working up preliminary sketches. Not because Julian asked her to, he hadn't asked her to sketch anything yet. Her official role on the commission was assisting with fabric sourcing and fitting logistics. But the problem had gotten inside her head, and the only way to quiet it was to work it out on paper. On the 3rd day, she left the sketches on Julian's cutting table and went to make coffee. When she came back, he was standing over them. He didn't say anything for a long time. She put his coffee beside him and started organizing the fabric swatches she'd pulled for the commission. "This one," he said finally, pointing to the 3rd sketch. A column silhouette with a modified dropped shoulder and an asymmetric hemline that read as evening wear until you noticed the architectural precision of the seaming. "This one is a dress." "It's a sketch," Nia said. "It's a dress," he repeated. "The hem needs half an inch more on the left side and the shoulder placement needs to move back 2 centimeters, but this is a dress." He looked at her. "Did you do these last night?" "Tuesday and Wednesday nights." "At home?" "Yes." He looked at the sketches again, then at her. "Sophie comes in Friday. Show her this one." "That's your decision to make, not, I'm making it." He set the sketches down. "This is what you should be doing." "I'm doing what you need me to do." "I need you to do this." He tapped the sketch. "The other things, the pressing, the inventory, those are what I needed you to do while you remembered how to trust yourself." You remember now, so do this. Nia looked at the sketch. She thought about the fitting with Margot, the shoulder seam, the way the charmeuse had moved afterward. She picked up the sketch. I'll need to adjust the hem, she said. I know, do it before Friday. Sophie Renard loved it, not effusively. Sophie was not effusive. She delivered opinions the way French women of her generation delivered opinions, which was with the brevity of someone who considered excess enthusiasm to be a form of imprecision. She looked at the sketch for a full minute without speaking. Then she said, How long for the toile? 3 weeks, Nia said. Her French by then was functional. Not fluent, but functional. She could hold a client meeting if she didn't panic, and she'd decided in the second week that panic was not a thing she had time for. 2, Sophie said. The fabric you've chosen needs to be handled. 2.5, Sophie said. And I want the seaming done by hand throughout. I can tell the difference. So can I, Nia said. Sophie looked at her directly for the first time. Good. The 2.5 weeks were the hardest Nia had worked since before Eli was born. She came in at 7:30. She stayed until 9 some nights, taking the metro home in the dark, eating whatever she could put together quickly, sketching for an hour after Eli was asleep, setting an alarm for 6. She was exhausted in a way that was completely different from the exhaustion of the marriage, which had been the exhaustion of someone performing a role they'd slowly stopped believing in. This exhaustion had a direction to it. It went somewhere. When Sophie came in for the first fitting of the toile, she stood in front of the mirror for a long time. It's what I had in my head, she said quietly. Exactly. Julian, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, said nothing. Nia said, We'll make adjustments from the toile. The final will be better. That's a very confident thing to say, Sophie said. She was almost smiling. It's an accurate thing to say, Nia replied. Sophie looked at her in the mirror. Do you take independent commissions? The room went slightly quiet. Nia glanced at Julian. He was looking at a spot on the wall with an expression of great interest in absolutely nothing. Not currently, Nia said. I work with Julian. I have 3 friends who are getting married in the next 18 months, Sophie said. Women who want exactly what you've given me. Not bridal collections, not something off a runway adjusted at the waist. Something made by someone who understands that a dress should serve the woman, not the other way around. She looked at Nia steadily. I'm going to tell them about you. I'd like to be able to tell them where to find you. The silence held for another moment. Julian coughed, which was not a real cough. I'll be at this atelier, Nia said, for the foreseeable future. Sophie nodded. Then this is where I'll send them. After she left, Nia stood in the fitting room for a moment. Then she went to the cutting table, sat down, and put her face in her hands. Not crying. She was not crying. She was just holding her own head for a moment, feeling the specific weight of something that had been very far away beginning to come back within reach. She heard Julian set something down on the table beside her. She looked up. He'd put a glass of water there. Don't do the face and hands thing in front of clients, he said. I wasn't in front of a client. You'll be in front of more of them soon. He picked up his own coffee. Drink the water. She drank the water. She looked at the cutting table, at the pattern pieces pinned to the board, at the fabric samples from the Renard Commission stacked in order of the process she'd mapped out for the final construction. Julian, she said. Thank you for... She stopped. The sentence had too many possible endings. For the job. For not asking. For the Monday morning at 9. For saying this is a dress in exactly the right tone of voice at exactly the right moment. He waved his hand. Drink the water, he said again, and walked away. She sat there for another minute. Then she picked up her pencil. She had 3 more sketches she wanted to work out before Friday. She had a second notebook already half full, and a third one started. She had a client who was going to send her friends. She had a small apartment with a radiator that sounded like an old man and a son who was becoming bilingual without trying, and yellow flowers in a measuring cup on the kitchen table. She was not fine yet. She was not healed yet. There were nights when she lay in the dark and the ballroom came back to her. The chandeliers, the taste of copper, the particular silence of a room full of people watching something they couldn't unhappen. And those nights she lay still and breathed through it until it passed, because it always passed eventually. But she was here. She was working. She was becoming slowly and with difficulty, and without any guarantee of how it ended, the person she had quietly abandoned in a Manhattan penthouse in exchange for the life of someone who stood beside a powerful man and called it safety. She picked up her pencil and started sketching. Outside the north-facing windows of Julien Marchand's atelier, on a narrow street in the 11th arrondissement, Paris continued its absolute indifference. And Nia Bennett, not Castillo, just Bennett, just hers, bent her head over the paper and worked, and the pencil moved, and the lines on the page began to build something that had not existed before she put them there, which was, she was beginning to remember, exactly the point. 2 years is a long time to rebuild a life. It is also, Nia discovered, not long enough. She found this out on a Tuesday in October, on a sidewalk beside the Seine, with a bag of pastries in one hand and Eli's hand in the other, when a black sedan pulled to the curb across the street, and the door opened and Lorenzo Castillo stepped out looking like a man who had lost 20 pounds and found nothing to replace them with. She saw him before he saw her. That 3-second gap, the moment between recognition and being recognized, was the last moment of the life she had spent 2 years constructing, and she knew it even as it was happening, the way you sometimes know a thing is ending before the ending is complete. She had time to register everything, the way he stood differently, less certain in his body, the hollows in his face, the jacket that fit him the same as always but hung on something diminished inside it. She had time to think, with a clarity that surprised her, he looks terrible. Then he looked up and said her name. There was nothing theatrical about it. He didn't shout. He said it the way you say the name of something you've been searching for long enough that finding it feels more like exhaustion than relief. Nia. She stopped walking. Beside her, Julien stopped too. He glanced at her face, then across the street, then back at her face, and in the 9 months since she'd become something more than an employee to him. Something quieter and more complicated that neither of them had found the right words for yet. He had learned to read her the way you learn to read weather, not by what's visible, but by what the light is doing. He said nothing. Eli, who was 4 months away from turning 7 and had the situational awareness of someone twice his age, looked across the street and then up at his mother. "Maman, who is that?" She had 4 seconds to decide how to answer. Lorenzo was already moving toward them, crossing the street without checking for traffic, the black sedan still idling at the curb behind him. He moved the way he'd always moved in moments he wanted to control. Fast, decisive, arriving before you'd finished processing that he was coming. She felt Julien shift half a step closer to her left side. Not dramatically, just there. Lorenzo reached the sidewalk. He stopped 6 feet from them. He looked at Nia for a long moment, taking inventory, the same way he'd always taken inventory of rooms and situations, assessing before speaking. But there was something different in it now. The calculation was still there, but the confidence underneath it was not. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this moment 100 times and was only now discovering that rehearsal is useless when the actual moment arrives. "You look," he started. "Lorenzo," she said. One word, level, not warm and not cold. The voice of a woman who has had 2 years to decide exactly how much a name is worth. He closed his mouth. "What are you doing here?" she said. "I have meetings, business. There's a distribution deal I'm working on with—" He stopped himself. Something shifted in his face. "I wanted to see you, both of you." His eyes moved to Eli. Him, especially. Eli was standing behind Nia's left leg now, which was a regression to a habit he'd abandoned a year ago, and she felt that in her chest like a stitch pulled too tight. "Eli," Lorenzo said. His voice changed completely on the name, all the control leaving it, something underneath exposed and raw. "Hey, buddy." Eli looked at him with the careful, neutral expression of a child who has learned that the world contains situations where the right response is to wait and see. "Eli," Nia said quietly, "this is your papa." She said it because not saying it would have been a cruelty, and she was not cruel. She had decided that in the apartment in the 10th arrondissement on a night when she'd been angry enough to be cruel and had chosen not to be, because Eli would remember how she handled this, would carry the shape of it into his own adulthood, and she was not going to give him a mother who handled hard things by being small. Eli looked at Lorenzo. Lorenzo crouched down to eye level, which was the right instinct, and looked at his son with an expression that Nia would have had to be made of something harder than she was to watch without feeling. "Hey," Lorenzo said. "I know it's been a while." Eli looked at him for a long moment. The assessment was complete, serious, unhurried. The face of a child who has been living in a city that taught him to be fluent in reading rooms. "How long?" he said. Lorenzo's jaw moved. "Too long." "Maman says that about vegetables," Eli said. "When we forget them in the fridge." Julian made a sound that was absolutely not a laugh. Lorenzo looked up at Nia, and for 1 second, one specific, unguarded second, she saw something in his face that she hadn't seen in 5 years of marriage. Not the confident man who filled rooms, not the powerful man who moved through the world like it had been arranged for his convenience. Just someone who had arrived somewhere too late and knew it and was looking at the proof of it in a child's face. Then he stood up. He looked at Julian. Julian looked back at him with the particular composure of a man who is not trying to establish dominance because he doesn't need to. "Who is this?" Lorenzo said. "Julian Marchand," Julian said pleasantly. "I have known Nia for 12 years. And you?" The pleasantness was perfect. There was nothing hostile in it and nothing welcoming either. It was the pleasantness of a man who has absolutely nothing to prove and is simply existing in a space he's been invited to occupy. Lorenzo looked at Nia. "Is this—" He stopped, looked back at Julian. "Are you two—" "Lorenzo." Her voice was quiet, but it had an edge in it now. "What did you come here to say?" He looked at her. He said, "Come home." The Seine moved behind her. A boat passed somewhere on the water. She could hear Eli shifting his weight on the cobblestones and the distant sound of traffic, and the particular quality of Paris air in October, which was cold and carried something in it, exhaust and bread, and the river, that she had stopped noticing months ago because it had simply become the smell of where she lived. "No," she said. "Nia." His voice cracked on the second syllable, just slightly. "I know what I did. I know what I didn't do. I've had 2 years to understand exactly how much I didn't see, and I see it now, all of it, and I need you to—" "I heard you," she said. "The answer is no." "I've changed." "I know you have," she said, and she meant it, and it didn't change anything. "That's not the question." "Then what is the question?" She looked at him for a moment. "There isn't one. I'm not looking for answers from you anymore, Lorenzo. I'm not angry. I'm not waiting. I have a life here. Eli has a life here." She glanced down at her son, who was watching this exchange with the focused attention of someone absorbing information for future use. "We're okay." "I know you're okay. I've seen—" He stopped. She looked at him sharply. "You've seen what?" A pause. Long enough to be its own kind of answer. "How long have you been coming to Paris?" she said. He didn't answer. "Lorenzo, how long?" "This is my 4th trip," he said. The number landed with physical weight. "You've been here 4 times," she said slowly, "and this is the first time you've—" "I wasn't ready before." "To what? To cross a street? To face whatever your face was going to do," he said. Just like that. No performance in it. "I watched you from—" He stopped again. "It doesn't matter. I know how it sounds. It sounds like surveillance. It sounds like a man who didn't know how to do the one thing he should have been doing the whole time, which is show up." His voice was getting rougher. "I know that. I am not here to argue that I deserve something I threw away. I'm here because I needed to see you. I needed to see him. And I needed you to know that Bianca is gone, and the businesses are restructured, and I've been in therapy for 18 months, which I know doesn't fix anything, but I—" "Therapy," she said. "Yes." 18 months. "Yes." She looked at him. "Did they tell you that showing up on a Paris sidewalk without warning after watching from hotel windows was a healthy choice?" He had the grace to look down. "No." "Okay." "Nia—" "Okay," she said again, and the word was not agreement. It was a door closing gently but completely. She reached down and took Eli's hand. "Eli, say goodbye." Eli looked at Lorenzo with the expression he wore when he was filing something away. "Goodbye," he said, in French, which was perhaps accidental and perhaps not. Lorenzo crouched back down. His voice went very quiet. "Can I— Is there a way? Can I see you again, before I leave? Eli looked at Nia. Nia looked at her son's face, at the careful, watchful expression there, at the fact that he was holding her hand very firmly. I'll have my attorney contact yours, she said, for a structured visit, somewhere public, something scheduled. Lorenzo absorbed this. A supervised visit, a scheduled attorney-brokered meeting with his own son. Something in his face worked through that and came out the other side looking like a man who has accepted a punishment he knows he deserves. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. She walked away. She did not look back. She had not looked back since the night she left, and she was not going to start on a Paris sidewalk in October with a bag of pastries getting cold. They were half a block away when Eli said, "He looked sad." "Yes," Nia said. "Is that our fault?" She slowed down, looked at him. "No, it's nobody's fault. Sometimes people make choices that hurt other people, and then they're sad about the choices they made. That's what happened." Eli walked quietly for a moment. "Julian doesn't do that." "No," she said. "He doesn't." "That's good." "Yes," she said. "It is." Julian, who had been walking on Eli's other side and had heard all of this, said nothing. He bought Eli a hot chocolate from a cart at the corner of the next block, and they walked back toward the atelier in the October cold. And somewhere behind them, a black sedan was still idling at the curb beside the Seine, and Nia did not turn to look at it. She was done turning to look at things that were behind her. The months after Lorenzo's appearance on the sidewalk were the most productive and the most destabilizing of Nia's time in Paris, which was not a contradiction so much as a demonstration of how the human capacity for work expands in direct proportion to how much you need to not be thinking. She was not thinking about Lorenzo's face when she crouched in front of Eli. She was not thinking about it when she finished the Renard commission and Sophie's mother called personally to request a meeting. She was not thinking about it at 2 in the morning over her drafting table, or at 6 in the morning making Eli's breakfast, or at 9 in the morning opening the atelier with the specific satisfaction of a woman who has a key to a place she has earned the right to unlock. She was absolutely not thinking about it, constantly, in the way you are not thinking about the thing that sits in the room while you are working on something else. Sophie's 3 friends arrived within 6 weeks of each other, which meant that by the following spring, Nia had 4 independent commissions running alongside her work at the atelier, which meant she was working 16-hour days and sleeping 6 hours, and spending the hours between putting Eli to bed and starting to sketch doing the math on what it would take to do this independently. The math kept coming out the same. She needed capital she didn't have. She needed a space she couldn't afford. She needed to produce a collection that demonstrated range, rather than individual commissions, something with enough scope that buyers and press would take her seriously as a label, rather than a talented seamstress working out of someone else's atelier. She needed, in short, to take a risk she wasn't sure she was ready to take. Julian knew what she was calculating. She could tell because he stopped asking her about the timeline on certain atelier projects with the specific restraint of a man who is making space and waiting to see if someone walks through it. The conversation happened on a Thursday evening when the atelier was empty, Celine gone, the light from the north windows going golden and sideways the way it did in late afternoon. Nia was at the cutting table. Julian was at his desk in the back room. She heard him set down his pen. He came to the doorway. "There's a gallery space," he said, "on Rue de Bretagne. The owner is a former client. She's been asking me for 3 years if I know a young designer who wants a small presentation venue. The space holds 40 people comfortably, 60 if you don't mind them being friendly." He paused. "She would discount the rental for someone I vouched for." Nia looked up from the cutting table. "That's a lot of things to say to someone who hasn't asked you a question," she said. "I'm saying it anyway." "Julian, don't." He crossed his arms. "Don't tell me it's too soon or you're not ready or the capital isn't there. The capital isn't there for anyone when they start. That's what starting is." "I have a son." "I know you have a son. I helped him with his French homework last Tuesday." She looked at him. "The commissions you have," he said, "are enough for a small collection. 6 pieces, 8 if you push. You already have 3 that are close to presentation quality. You have a voice. You have clients who sent each other to you without being asked. What you don't have..." He stopped. "What you don't have is confidence that what you build will belong to you, that nobody will take it from you or ask you to make it smaller or put it away for later." He was quiet for a moment. I can't give you that confidence, but I can tell you that the gallery is available, and the owner trusts me, and the people who come to those presentations buy things. The light was going sideways. Nia put down her pencil. What do I call it? She said. Julian looked at her. The label, she said. I need to know what to call it before I decide. What do you want to call it? She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Nia Bennett Atelier, she said. Julian was quiet. Not Castillo, she said more quietly. Not even just Bennett, just mine. That's a good name, he said. Yes, she said. It is. She booked the gallery for April. The preparation was of the kind of work that turns days transparent. You look up and 3 weeks have gone. You can account for every hour, but the hours have moved through you rather than you through them. She was at the atelier by 7, home by 9, sketching until midnight, up at 6. She was running on caffeine and the specific adrenaline of someone who can see a shape in the dark and is moving toward it before she's sure she can reach it. She had 8 pieces. She wanted 10. She ended at 9, which felt honest. 10 would have required compromising 2 of them, and she was done compromising to fill a number. The invitations went out 3 weeks before the presentation. Julian handled the press contacts. Sophie Renard handled the private client list with the efficiency of someone who was also, Nia suspected, enjoying herself enormously. Celine managed the logistics with the organizational precision of a woman who had been quietly holding Julian's professional life together for 9 years and applied the same energy here with what appeared to be genuine investment. 42 people confirmed. Nia looked at the confirmation list on a Sunday afternoon in March, sitting at the kitchen table while Eli did his homework across from her. She was holding the printed list in both hands, reading the names. Maman, Eli said, without looking up from his worksheet, your face is doing a thing. What thing? The scaring, but a little bit the excited thing too. They look the same on you. She put the list down. Do they? Oui. He wrote something on his worksheet. I get that face before football matches. You're very perceptive, she said. I know. He looked up. Are you going to be okay? She looked at her son, at the French notebook and the soccer calluses on his knees and the way he looked at her with the particular attention of a child who has learned that the adults in his life require careful observation. And she thought about the kitchen floor in Manhattan, the sketches spread out in the middle of the night, the one-way ticket, the 4 a.m. email to her attorney. Yes, she said. Promise? I promise. He went back to his worksheet. Good, he said. Can we have crepes for dinner? Yes, she said. We can have crepes for dinner. She picked up the list again. 42 names. She had designed for an audience of 1 for 5 years, had shaped herself around the needs and preferences and social requirements of one man in one penthouse, in one version of a life she had agreed to live. And now she was 3 weeks from standing in a gallery in Paris with 9 pieces of work that belonged entirely to herself, with her own name on the door, asking 42 strangers to see her. The fear was real. She held it and kept working. The night before the presentation, she stayed late at the atelier alone after Julian left. She went through each piece, checked every seam, repressed the column gown that was closing the collection. Ivory silk crepe, long-sleeved, a deliberately simple silhouette that communicated everything she wanted to communicate about the philosophy she'd rebuilt herself around. Clothing for women who don't want to disappear. The seaming was hand-done throughout. The construction was the cleanest work she'd produced in her life. She stood looking at it on the dress form for a long time. She thought about Margot in the Charmeuse gown, saying you should be designing. She thought about Sophie looking in the mirror, saying it's what I had in my head. She thought about Julian's voice. This is a dress. She thought about the ballroom, the chandeliers, the way the room had felt when it went silent. She was still thinking about the ballroom. She suspected she would be thinking about the ballroom for a long time. Not because she was still living in it, but because it was the specific moment where the version of herself she'd been rebuilding ever since had begun, had become necessary. And you don't stop thinking about the beginning of necessary things. She turned off the light over the dress form. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She locked the atelier. Outside on the narrow street in the 11th arrondissement, it was cold and quiet, and the smell of bread from the boulangerie on the corner was fading because they'd closed an hour ago. But something of it remained, the way smells stay in the air longer than the thing that made them. She stood on the street for a moment. Tomorrow she would stand in a gallery in Paris and ask 42 people to see work with her name on it. She had never been more frightened. She had never been more certain. Both of those things were true at the same time, and she'd lived long enough now, survived enough, that she knew they were not opposites. She knew that the things worth doing were exactly the ones where the fear and the certainty arrived together, and you had to choose which one to put your weight on. She started walking toward the metro. She put her weight on the certainty. The gallery on Rue de Bretagne was warm when she arrived the next evening. Too warm, actually. The heating was running higher than she'd requested, and she spent the first 20 minutes with the owner adjusting it, which was not how she'd intended to spend the 20 minutes before 42 people arrived. But it was better to be doing something practical than standing in the center of the room catastrophizing. So she adjusted the heating and arranged the chairs and moved the lighting rig 6 inches to the left because the angle on the column gown wasn't right. And then the first guests began arriving. Julian came in with Celine. He stood near the back, as he always did at these events, and did not offer opinions or suggestions, which was the greatest possible gift. Sophie Renard arrived with 2 women Nia recognized from the private commission list, and one she didn't. The gallery filled. More than 42. She counted 51 before she stopped counting. A journalist from a trade publication Nia recognized caught her near the entry and asked 3 questions about the collection's philosophy. Nia answered them directly, without the polished evasion she'd learned to perform at Lorenzo's events. She said, "The clothes are for women who have stopped apologizing for taking up space." She said, "The seaming is visible in several pieces because I want the construction to be part of the design, not hidden inside it." She said, "I've been working on this specific silhouette for 2 years, and I knew it was right when my client looked in the mirror and stopped talking." The journalist wrote all 3 down. The presentation began. 6 models, 9 pieces. The walkthrough was quiet and clean, no music, which had been Julian's suggestion, and which Nia had initially resisted and which she now understood was exactly right. The silence made the clothes louder. The column gown was last. The model moved into the center of the gallery, and the room went. Not quiet. It was already quiet. It went attentive, the quality of air changing the way air changes when something is happening that everyone in a room recognizes at once. Applause began before the model had finished her turn. Nia heard it and felt it in her hands first, which made no anatomical sense and was completely true. Someone called for the designer. She was standing near the back wall. She felt the old reflex, the one she'd been training for 5 years, the stand-back reflex, the make room for him reflex, the wait for your cue reflex. Rise up in her for one instinctive second, and she let it rise, and she let it go, and she walked through it and kept walking until she was standing in the center of the room with 51 people facing her. The journalist raised a hand. "Can you tell us about the collection's theme?" She looked out at the room, at the faces, at Julian near the back with his arms crossed and his expression giving nothing away. At Sophie Renard in the 3rd row watching her with something that looked remarkably like pride. At the column gown still in the light behind her, ivory and precise and entirely itself. She said, "Choosing for yourself." The room was quiet for a moment. Then it wasn't. The offer came in during the reception. A woman named Dana Ellison, 50-ish, New York-based, the kind of person who wore her authority rather than announcing it, who'd been in the back row during the presentation and had said nothing but whose stillness had the quality of someone paying very careful attention. She found Nia near the end of the evening and handed her a card with the kind of directness that doesn't waste time on preamble. "I represent a group of investors who've been looking for exactly this," she said. "Clean construction, specific point of view, bridal adjacent but not bridal dependent. We can offer you a flagship location in New York, financing, full creative control, a marketing team that knows how to position an independent label in the American market." She paused. "It's a real offer. Not a conversation starter. Real terms, real capital, real timeline. I'll send the formal document to whatever contact you want." Nia looked at the card. Dana Ellison, New York, New York. She looked at it for a long moment. "Thank you," she said. "I'll be in touch." Dana nodded once and moved away with the efficiency of someone who has made their point and doesn't require the reaction to confirm it. Nia stood holding the card. She looked at the gallery. The people still moving through it, the pieces on the forms, the column gown still lit in the center of the room where they'd left it because no one had asked to take it down yet. She looked at the card again. New York. She thought about what New York meant, about the penthouse and the midnight blue dresses and the events she'd attended in rooms like this one, standing beside a man whose name she'd worn like a second gown, taking up exactly as much space as she'd been given, and no more. She thought about the apartment in the 10th arrondissement with the radiator that sounded like an old man and the yellow flowers in the measuring cup, and the son who could now argue with his teacher in French, and did so regularly and without remorse. She thought about what it would mean to go back, whether going back would prove she wasn't afraid of anything, whether proving she wasn't afraid was a reason to do anything. She stood in the gallery on Rue de Bretagne with Dana Ellison's card in her hand, and the applause still resonating somewhere behind her sternum and the ivory column gown lit in the center of the room, and she understood, with the specific, irreversible clarity of a woman who has learned to tell the difference between a choice made from strength and a choice made from the need to prove something, that she already knew her answer. She just needed a night to make sure the answer was coming from the right place before she gave it. She tucked the card into her bag. She went to find Julian. He was standing near the door with 2 glasses of wine, one of which he handed her without comment. She stood beside him and looked at the room they had built together. The people, the clothes, the light, the name on the small card by the entry that said Nia Bennett Atelier. In clean block letters that she had typeset herself because she wanted every decision about this thing to be. She stood beside Julian with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking and Dana Ellison's card sitting in her bag like a small stone, and the name Nia Bennett Atelier on the card. By the entry caught the light at an angle that made the letters look like they'd always been there, like they'd been waiting for the room to be built around them. Julian said nothing. That was one of the things she had learned about him in the 2 years since she'd arrived at his atelier, with a broken portfolio spine and terrible French, and the specific silence of someone who has packed their grief so tightly it doesn't make a sound anymore. He did not feel silence the way most people did. He let it be what it was. She sipped the wine. Someone made me an offer, she said. I know. I saw her give you the card. New York, a flagship, full creative control, financing, the whole thing. Julian looked at the room, at the column gown still lit in the center, at Sophie Renard near the far wall laughing at something with one of her friends, at Celine collecting empty glasses with the systematic efficiency she brought to everything. What did you tell her? He said. That I'd be in touch. That's not a real response. I'm not the one who needs to respond, he said. He glanced at her sideways, just briefly. What do you want to do? She looked at the card in her hand, which she'd taken out of her bag without realizing it. I want to know if I'm saying no because I've genuinely built something here, she said, or because I'm still afraid of that city. Julian was quiet for a moment. Are those different things? She thought about it. Yes, she said finally. I think they are. Then which one is it? She looked at the gallery, at the name on the card by the entry, at the 9 pieces she had made from 2 years of rebuilding herself in a language that wasn't hers, in a city that didn't care about her story, in a life she had constructed from what was left after everything comfortable had been removed. I'm not afraid of New York, she said. I'm not afraid of Lorenzo. I'm not afraid of what people think about a woman who left and built something. She turned the card over in her fingers. Paris is home. That's different from being afraid to leave it. Julian nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded when he'd reached a conclusion 3 steps before she finished talking. Then you know what to tell her, he said. Yes. She put the card back in her bag. She did not throw it away. She was not someone who made decisions from drama. She would respond to Dana Ellison by email in the morning, professionally and without apology, and decline the offer in 3 clear sentences, because the clearer you were, the more respect you showed for both parties' time, and she had learned that from Julian without him ever saying it directly. She finished the wine. Around them, the gallery was beginning to empty. The evening doing what evenings did, thinning slowly at the edges, guests finding their coats, the particular warmth of a room full of people beginning to dissipate as they left it. The column gown was still lit. Nobody had asked to take it down, and she wasn't going to be the one to do it yet. "Julian," she said. He turned to look at her. She had thought about how to say this for longer than she was going to admit. She'd thought about it in the apartment late at night, and on the metro, and in the middle of pressing seams at the atelier when the rhythm of the work left her mind free to go where it wanted. She was not a person who performed feelings well, had never been. Lorenzo had sometimes said that she was hard to read, which she understood now was his way of saying she did not make it easy for him to know what she needed, which was fair, but also misread the situation, because she had been telling him what she needed for years, and he simply hadn't been listening. Julian listened. That was the thing she kept coming back to. He listened with his whole attention, not with the part of himself that wasn't occupied with something else. "I know this isn't simple," she said. "I know I came here with luggage that isn't mine to give anyone else to carry. I know Eli is a specific kind of complexity, and the Castillo name is a specific kind of history, and none of that goes away because I want it to." She stopped. "But I want you to know that what we've built here, the two of us, it's the realest thing I've had in a long time, and I don't want to be quiet about it anymore." Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been waiting 11 months for you to say that." 11 months? Since the Renard fitting. When you told Sophie Renard you were at this atelier for the foreseeable future. He paused. "You looked at me when you said it. You weren't talking about the job." She stared at him. "I was talking about the job," she said. "You were also not talking about the job." She opened her mouth, closed it. He was right. She had not entirely been talking about the job. She had known that at the time and told herself otherwise, and he had apparently seen it clearly for 11 months without saying a word, because he had the patience of someone who understood that some things have to be ready before they can be said. "You could have said something," she said. "So could you." She looked at him. At the particular face that had become the face she looked for when she walked into the atelier in the morning, that she oriented toward in a room the way a person orients toward reliable light. 61 years old and honest and present and constitutionally incapable of filling silence with anything that didn't need to be said. "I'm saying it now," she said. "I know," he said. "I heard you." He did not kiss her in the gallery in front of the remaining guests because that was not who he was, and she was grateful for that too. He simply put his hand on the small of her back, just briefly, just enough to be real, and then removed it, and they stood together looking at the room until it emptied. She emailed Dana Ellison the next morning. 3 sentences. Professional, direct, warm in the appropriate measure. "Thank you for the generous offer. The timing and location don't align with where the label is positioned right now." She wished Dana's group success and left the door technically open because closing doors permanently was a young person's habit, and Nia was done with habits that came from fear. She sent it at 8:15 in the morning before she left for the atelier. By the time she arrived at 8:30, there was already a response in her inbox. Dana Ellison, it turned out, was not someone who sulked about a no. The response was 5 sentences, equally professional, which said, "I respect this entirely. The offer stands if circumstances change. The collection was exceptional, the column gown especially. You should know that 3 of the people in that room last night have already asked me for your contact information." Nia read it twice. Then she put her phone in her bag and went to work. 3 weeks later, Teresa Castillo called. Not to report on Lorenzo, which was what Nia had braced for in the half-second before she answered. Teresa called because Teresa called. She had been calling every 2 or 3 weeks since Paris, keeping a line open, the way you keep a line open between people who matter to each other, and their conversations had settled into a particular rhythm. Eli's school, her own health, the neighborhood in New Jersey where she'd lived for 40 years. The garden she grew tomatoes in every summer and cursed every summer for the amount of work it required and replanted every spring anyway. I saw something online, Teresa said, after the Eli update and the tomato update and the neighbor update. About the presentation. There were photographs. There were a few. The white dress. A pause. Nia. The white dress. It's ivory, technically. It's the most beautiful thing I've seen in 30 years of watching fashion events I didn't want to attend. Teresa's voice had the particular warmth of someone who has earned the right to be direct about beauty. My son doesn't deserve credit for what you've made, but I need to say, that I am so sorry for what my family cost you. Not just him, all of us. You married into something that asked you to be less than you were and called it protection. Nia sat down on the edge of the cutting table. Teresa, she said, let me finish. Okay. I knew what he was doing, not the Bianca thing. I didn't know the extent of that. But the absences. The way he looked past you at events. The way he forgot things that mattered. Her voice was steady, not tearful. Teresa Castillo had done her crying in private years ago. I should have said something to him earlier. I kept thinking he would see it himself. He's a smart man. I thought eventually. She stopped. Anyway, I wanted to say it to you directly. Not because it changes anything, because you deserve someone in that family to say it. The atelier was quiet around Nia. Morning light on the cutting table. Bolts of fabric along the wall in the system that she and Celine had reorganized last month into something more logical. The dress form near the window with the current commission pinned to it. It doesn't need to change anything, Nia said. That's not why I needed to hear it. I needed to hear it because... She thought about it. Because for a long time I thought I was the problem, that I'd been too difficult or too demanding or too... She stopped. Too something. You were never too anything, Teresa said flatly. You were exactly enough. He just wasn't paying attention. I know that now. Good. A beat. How is my grandson? And just like that, they were back in the rhythm. Eli's football team, the French homework, the thing he'd said last week that had made Nia laugh until her eyes watered. The weight of what had just been said didn't disappear. It settled, the way things settle when they've finally found the level they belong at. Before they hung up, Teresa said, I'm thinking of coming to Paris in the spring. Come, Nia said. Eli will want to take you to every patisserie in the arrondissement. Consider it a warning. Teresa laughed. I've raised a Castillo. I can handle a pastry tour. After she hung up, Nia sat on the cutting table for another minute. She thought about Teresa standing at that kitchen table in New Jersey with the 1987 tile, rolling dough, saying Lorenzo loves the way fire loves wood. Completely. Entirely. Until there's nothing left of you. She thought about how long she'd carried that sentence in the wrong direction, as a compliment rather than a map of the damage coming. She got off the cutting table. She went back to work. Lorenzo came back to Paris one more time. She had known, in some peripheral way, that he would. The sidewalk encounter in October had been too unresolved. She could see it in how he'd walked away, the set of his shoulders, the black sedan idling too long before it finally pulled away. He was a man who did not leave things unfinished, even when the things were finished without him. He called ahead this time. That was different. He called her phone at 7 in the evening, and when she answered, he said, I'm in Paris. I'd like to see Eli. I know you said through the attorneys, but I wanted to ask you directly first. Is that okay? She stood in her kitchen with the phone in her hand. Yes, she said. Saturday afternoon. There's a park near the school. 2 hours. Thank you. Lorenzo. She paused. I'll be there. I know. That's fine. Saturday was cold and gray, the kind of Paris day that wasn't dramatic about it, just consistently, politely unwilling to be anything other than gray. Nia brought a thermos of coffee. She sat on a bench at the edge of the park while Lorenzo and Eli occupied the middle distance. Eli showing Lorenzo something about the climbing structure with the thoroughness of a child conducting an official tour, Lorenzo crouching and standing and crouching again, following the tour with the focus of someone who understood this was being extended as a privilege and not a right. She watched them. Lorenzo was patient in a way she had not expected, not performing patience, actually patient, willing to wait while Eli decided whether he wanted to go down the slide or climb back up, and whether Lorenzo was allowed to follow him or should stay at the bottom, the specific negotiations of a child determining the terms under which a stranger was permitted in his space. By the end of the first hour, Eli had permitted Lorenzo to push him on the swings. By the end of the second, he was explaining something about his football team in rapid French that Lorenzo clearly didn't fully follow, but listened to anyway without pretending to understand, just saying yeah and okay at the right intervals, which Eli accepted as a reasonable response. When the 2 hours were up, Eli came back to the bench. He looked at his mother. "Can I say goodbye to him?" "Of course." He went back to Lorenzo. Nia watched Lorenzo crouch down again. She couldn't hear what was said. Eli said something. Lorenzo nodded. Eli turned and ran back toward the bench without the particular weight of a child who has just had a hard conversation. Whatever had been said between them was his, and she was not going to ask. Lorenzo walked over. He stopped a few feet from the bench. "Thank you," he said. "He's your son," she said. "That's not something I get to take from him." Lorenzo looked at Eli, who was rummaging in Nia's bag looking for something. He's good. He's really good." "Yes," she said. "He is." Lorenzo looked back at her. "You did that." "We did that," she said. "You and me both, in our different ways. The biology is yours. The football team is his school's. The French is Paris. Don't give me too much credit." He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to a smile, but it went somewhere near the neighborhood of one. "I'm not coming back after this," he said. I'm not coming back for that. I understand what you've told me, and I believe you mean it, and I'm not—" He stopped. "I'd like to have a real arrangement for Eli. Something structured, predictable, that he can count on. Not contingent on me feeling ready or him feeling ready, just something dependable." She looked at him. This was the thing she had not expected. Not the acknowledgement, which she'd seen building since October, but the specific vocabulary of it, predictable, something he can count on, dependable. The language of someone who had learned at significant personal cost what those words actually meant and why they mattered. "I'll have my attorney call yours this week," she said. "Something we can put in writing." "Good." He put his hands in his jacket pockets. "I know you're with Julian." She didn't flinch. "Yes." "Is he—" He stopped. Whatever he was going to ask, he redirected it. "Is Eli okay with it?" "Yes." He nodded, looked at the ground for a moment. "Okay." He looked up. "Good. That's good." And that sentence cost him something. She could see it cost him something, and she did not look away from it, but she also did not try to make it easier. Because some costs are what they are, and acknowledging them is not the same as removing them. "Lorenzo," she said. He looked at her. "What happened? What I chose? It wasn't because you were irredeemable. It was because I was disappearing." She said it evenly, without accusation. "I was losing the shape of myself inside that life, and I didn't know how to stop it while staying in it. That's not a verdict on you as a person. It's just what was true." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I think I knew it then too somewhere. I just—" He exhaled. "I didn't understand that loving someone didn't mean they owed you their whole self. I thought love was a kind of ownership. Very subtle, but ownership." He paused. "Therapy is very expensive," he said, "and it will tell you extremely uncomfortable things about yourself." She looked at him. Something happened. Not warmth exactly, not the warmth of what they'd been, but something adjacent to it. The recognition between two people who have shared something real and come out the other side of it into separate lives, carrying the shared thing differently now. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too." He looked at Eli one more time, who had found whatever he was looking for in the bag and was now examining it with complete absorption. "He's going to be extraordinary." "I know," she said. Lorenzo turned and walked away across the gray park. He did not look back. She watched him go until he was through the gate and gone. Then she looked at Eli, who looked up at exactly that moment and said, "Can we get hot chocolate?" "Yes," she said, "we can get hot chocolate." Spring came to Paris, the way spring came. Not all at once, but in small, persistent arguments against the gray. A warm Tuesday, then cold again, then 2 warm days. Then something that was almost convincingly warm for a whole week before the weather remembered what month it was. Nia noticed it from the atelier windows, the light-changing quality, the street below getting its color back. She had 3 commissions running and a 4th inquiry she hadn't responded to yet. The atelier had reorganized itself around her in a way that had happened without anyone formally discussing it. Celine consulting her on client fit issues that previously would have gone straight to Julian, Julian himself bringing her into supplier meetings she hadn't been included in before. Nobody announced any of this. It simply happened, the way things happen when the balance of a place shifts and everyone adjusts to the new level without making it a conversation. She was not Julian's assistant anymore. She was not entirely sure what she was yet, formally, and they had agreed without agreeing to agree that they would let that clarify itself rather than force it into a shape. There was no official arrangement yet. There was instead the particular grammar of 2 people learning each other's habits. The coffee Julian made her in the morning, without asking, because he'd learned how she drank it, the way she straightened the bolts in the back room in the order that made sense to his system, rather than her own natural order. Because his system was genuinely better. The Wednesday evenings they'd started spending at the small restaurant on the corner where the owner knew Julian by name and gave them the table near the window and brought bread without being asked. Eli called him Julian without any instruction to do so, and without the particular caution he'd used in the early months, when he'd been watching and waiting the way perceptive children wait, to see if this was something that was going to stay. One evening in April, Julian photographed them. It was incidental. He'd been trying to get a shot of the apartment window light for a fabric reference, the way late afternoon came through the glass, and Nia and Eli were there, Eli laughing at something she'd said, Nia turning toward the camera at the last moment without knowing she was being photographed. Julian showed her the image later. She stood looking at it for a while. She was not sure what she expected to see. Some residue of the ballroom, maybe. Some tension in her jaw. Some careful management of expression. The look of a woman performing relaxation rather than experiencing it. 5 years of attending events in rooms where every expression was a choice had left her uncertain about what her own face did when it wasn't being managed. What she saw was different. Her shoulders were down. Not consciously placed, actually down. The way shoulders go when they are not braced for something. Eli mid-laugh beside her, caught completely unguarded. The apartment light on both of them, warm and specific and belonging to no one's design aesthetic, just the ordinary light of an ordinary evening in a life that was actually being lived. She was smiling. Not the particular smile she'd worn in photographs at Castillo events. The one that communicated I am gracious and appropriate and present without overwhelming the room. This smile was different, less considered, more her. She looked at it for another moment. Then she gave Julian's phone back. "Send me that one," she said. He sent it. She set it as the wallpaper on her phone without thinking about it too hard. Because thinking about it too hard would have been the old habit, the analyzing everything habit, the is this the right choice habit. She was trying, consciously and with ongoing imperfect success, to do more things without asking herself if they were the right things first. To let some choices be simple. This one was simple. Teresa came in May. She arrived at Charles de Gaulle with one bag, and the particular posture of a woman who has traveled alone her entire life and has opinions about airports. Eli insisted on coming to pick her up, which meant Nia was at arrivals at 7:30 in the morning with a child who had set 3 alarms and dressed himself in his football jersey because he wanted Teresa to see what French football looked like. When Teresa came through the gate, Eli ran at her with the specific full-body investment of a child who has missed someone and has been too young to fully understand what missing means, but old enough to know what the arrival of that person feels like in the chest. Teresa caught him. She was 63 and small, and she caught him completely, held him off the ground for a moment that was slightly longer than her back could probably handle. Over Eli's shoulder, she looked at Nia. Her eyes were wet. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Nia crossed the arrivals hall and put her arms around both of them, around this small woman who had driven a Volvo through the Lincoln Tunnel at 4 in the morning and handed her a one-way ticket and never once asked her to reconsider. And for a moment the three of them stood there in the middle of Charles de Gaulle, with people moving around them in every direction, and none of them went anywhere. "Okay," Teresa said finally, her voice slightly unsteady. "Who's taking me to get a croissant?" "Me," Eli said immediately, still not letting go. "Then let's go." The week Teresa spent in Paris became the thing. Nia's memory would return to years later when she tried to locate the moment when the repair felt complete. Not the gallery presentation, not the walk in the park with Lorenzo, not even the photograph on Julian's phone. It was the week of Teresa in their apartment, sleeping on the pull-out with her reading glasses on the nightstand and her rosary, which she kept in her pocket, and Nia had agreed silently to simply not see, and her habit of being awake before anyone else, making coffee in the small kitchen with the competence of a woman who has made coffee in unfamiliar kitchens her whole life. It was Teresa watching Julian navigate the apartment with the ease of someone who knows where the good knives are and which cupboard the extra coffee was in, and saying nothing about it with the specific pointed nothing of a woman who is saying a great deal. It was Julian, on the third evening, making Teresa's favorite pasta without being asked how he knew it was her favorite, which meant Nia had told him at some point she didn't remember, which meant she talked about Teresa more than she realized. It was Eli teaching Teresa French words she didn't need, the ones for football positions, which he delivered with the gravity of someone passing on essential knowledge, and Teresa learning them all and deploying them incorrectly at dinner in ways that made Eli almost fall off his chair. It was the last night after Eli was asleep and Julian had gone home, and the apartment was quiet, sitting at the kitchen table with Teresa and the last of the wine, the way they'd sat in that New Jersey kitchen years ago, except everything was different, and also the same in the ways that mattered. "Are you happy?" Teresa asked. Nia thought about it. Not the polite version of the answer, not the managing the moment version, the actual answer. "Yes," she said. "Not in the way I thought I would be. Not the way I planned when I was 25 and thought happiness was a destination you arrived at." She turned the wine glass in her fingers. "It's more like knowing where I am, knowing what I'm doing and why. Having a son who sets 3 alarms because he wants to be at the airport on time." She paused. "That's happiness. The version I actually have." Teresa nodded slowly. "Lorenzo asked about you," she said. "When I talked to him before I came, he didn't ask directly, but I could tell." "What did you tell him?" "That you were exactly where you needed to be." Nia was quiet for a moment. "Is he okay?" He's managing. The businesses are strong. He sees a woman from his office, nothing serious, I think. He has a therapist he respects, which took him 3 tries to find." Teresa set down her glass. "He's learning who he is without being the person he thought everyone needed him to be. That's slow work." "Yes," Nia said. "It is." Teresa looked at her. "Do you forgive him?" The question sat between them. Nia had thought about this more than she'd admitted to anyone. Not whether she could forgive. She understood forgiveness as something you did for yourself, not for the other person. Had worked that out somewhere in the second year in Paris, on a night when she was too tired to maintain any story that wasn't true. But whether she had. "I think so," she said. "Not because what he did was acceptable, because carrying it was making me smaller, and I'm done being smaller." She paused. "I don't want him to suffer. I want him to be okay. I want him to be a father that Eli can count on. That's not forgiveness in the Hollywood sense. It's just not carrying it anymore." Teresa reached across the table and put her hand over Nia's. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. After Teresa left, after the apartment returned to its ordinary dimensions, and Eli went back to school and the atelier went back to its rhythm, there was a Tuesday in June that was warm for the first time that year, with genuine conviction, the kind of warm that wasn't apologizing for itself. Nia opened the atelier windows and left them open all day. She was working on the fourth commission, a woman getting married in September, a painter who wanted something that would let her move, that wouldn't restrict her the way she said every dress she'd ever worn had restricted her. And Nia was building it around that constraint, making the construction do the work that volume usually did, a fitted silhouette that had more freedom in it than its structure suggested. It was the best problem she'd worked on since the Renard Commission. Celine brought lunch at noon and they ate at the cutting table, which was against the rules Julian had articulated once and never enforced. Julian came in at 2 from a supplier meeting and stood in the doorway looking at what she'd done with the morning's work. "The back seam," he said. "I know. I'm going to reroute it before the toil." "Good." He came in and put his bag down. "There's something I want to ask you." She looked up from the pattern. He was not someone who prefaced things. When he said "there's something I want to ask," it meant the thing was specific, and he had already thought about how to say it. "I want to put your name on the door," he said. "Not instead of mine, beside it. The atelier would be Marchand and Bennett. Equal partnership, restructured finances, formal agreement." He paused. "I've been thinking about this for 4 months." She put down her pencil. 4 months, she said, since the gallery presentation, since the column gown. He crossed his arms, which was the posture he adopted when he was being careful about something. "I'm 61. I've been doing this alone for 30 years. The atelier needs what you bring to it, and I want it to be formally yours, not just actually yours." She looked at him. Then she looked at the atelier, the north-facing windows, and the bolts of fabric, and the cutting table, and the pattern on the board, and the dress form near the window with the painter's commission taking shape on it, her name on the door, beside his. Something moved in her chest that she recognized. Not the fear and certainty combination from the gallery night, but something quieter. Something that felt like arriving somewhere you'd been moving toward without knowing it was where you were going. "Yes," she said. He nodded. That was all. They went back to work. The sign went up on a Friday in July. It was a small sign. Julian was not a man who went in for grand gestures, which she had come to understand as one of the things she trusted most about him. A small brass plate beside the door, Marchand Bennett Atelier. Celine photographed it. Eli, who had been brought along for reasons that were ostensibly about Friday pickup logistics, and actually about the fact that Nia wanted him there, stood in front of the door and looked at the plate. "That's your name," he said. "Yes." "And Julian's?" "Yes." He looked at the plate for another moment. "That's good," he said. "Now everyone knows." "Knows what?" she said. He looked at her with the expression he wore when a question had an obvious answer that he was patient enough to provide. "That you're here," he said. "That this is yours." She looked at the brass plate in the Paris afternoon light. Marchand Bennett Atelier. Her name on a door in a city that had not cared about her story when she arrived and now held it the way cities hold things. Not tenderly, not deliberately, but completely, the way stone holds warmth after a long day. She thought about the penthouse, the midnight blue dresses, the ring on the kitchen island, the one-way ticket, the 4 a.m. email. She thought about the ballroom, the chandelier light, the taste of copper, the silence that lasted forever. She thought about Eli asleep on the plane with his stuffed giraffe, about Teresa's Volvo in the dark, about a portfolio with a broken spine that held sketches she'd forgotten were that good. She thought about the cutting table and the Charmeau's shoulder seam and the column gown lit in the gallery and Julian's hand on her back and a hot chocolate on the corner after a gray Saturday in the park. She thought about all the ways a life can end and begin inside the same year. Then she stopped thinking and just stood there, in the July afternoon, in front of the door with her name on it, and she let it be exactly what it was. Eli took her hand. She held it. Julian stood beside her in the comfortable quiet that had become the sound of her life. Not empty silence, not performed silence, just the particular quality of space between people who have nothing they need to prove to each other. After a moment, Eli said, "Can we go get crepes?" "Yes," she said. "Can Julian come?" She looked at Julian. He looked back at her with the expression she had learned meant yes before he said it. "Yes," she said. "Julian can come." They walked down the narrow street in the July light, the three of them, and behind them on the door of the atelier, the brass plate caught the afternoon sun and held it, the way good things hold the light that finds them, without effort, without performance, simply because they are solid enough and real enough and have been made to last. The street turned. They turned with it. And Nia Bennett, not Castillo, just Bennett, just hers, just her name on a door, in a city that had taught her to stop apologizing for taking up space, walked forward into the rest of her life without looking back. Not because the past wasn't real,